Yes, as Bill was mentioning, hi everybody, my name is Thomas Russell, CEO and co-founder of there we go. CEO, co-founder of Mesoline. Mesoline is developing a technology which we call MPD. And MPD is a novel wafer-scale deposition process to very accurately deposit nanoparticles at the wafer scale. So first of all, a little bit about, guys, interesting formatting. A little bit about Mesoline. So the core of Mesoline is the development of the MPD technology. And we basically offer this MPD technology to semiconductor foundries as a manufacturing service. So we enable semiconductor companies to develop next generation semiconductor devices using our services. Mesoline was founded in 2017 as a spin-off from Caltech. We're located in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. So the most important thing about the company is basically this new microfabrication technology called MPD. So the first thing I wanted to do is walk you through, like, very high level what this MPD technology is. So the core of the technology, I mean, it's a little bit small here for a 6-inch, but it's all centered around like this polymeric stamping material. So it was all in-house developed by us, and what we basically do is we very accurately align this to the wafer on which we want to print or want to deposit these nanoparticles. So we bring it into contact with the wafer. And as the next step, what we're doing is we have a delicate process in our machines that were in-house developed to inject a nano ink into this stamp. And the ink basically flows through the stamp, which is multi-layered, and comes to the exact positions where the microchannels are formed and basically form the volume made up by the wafer to which it's attached. So thereby what we can do is by placing the stamp on, for example, a MEMS wafer, we can actually integrate functional elements on exact locations on the wafer. So how does this compare to other microfabrication technologies you're probably more familiar with than to the MPD technology? So first of all, the MPD technology, we typically print or deposit features of this nano ink in the range of like with a width of about 5 microns. And the height can actually be very, very easily by changing the mold or changing the stamping material. So we can reach aspect ratios up to 5. And because we cure the ink while the stamp is still in contact with the wafer, we're able to very well control the shape and the 3D control the shape of the feature that's actually being printed. Another thing that we can do is we can get to very small line spacing. So let's say you have a line that's 5 microns wide. We can get to spacing that's about approximately the same as the width of that feature. Next is the deposition scale. So this is done at wafer scale. So let's say we're printing and we want to deposit, let's say, 40,000 lines on a 6-inch wafer, and we'd be using inkjetting. Then the nozzles of the inkjet have to go to every location on the wafer, and basically the problem is you get to very accurate features, but it will take you a very long time to actually fabricate the device. So that's another thing that's very important and powerful about the technology, that it's really used to do mass manufacturing because it's a stamping process. So if you would be coming to us to do prototyping, it will be hard because it will take us more time. But if we can do mass manufacturing, it will be much easier because we can do the stamping at wafer scale. Another thing that we believe might be very useful to the community is multi-material printing. So what we can actually do is we can inject at multiple spots in the stamp at once, multiple different of these nano inks. So let's say one would want to have like many lines next to each other. Let's say one from copper, one from gold, one from silver, one from a metal oxide, one from a polymer. We can do that at one process step, which is different than one would be using, for example, screen printing, because you would have to have multiple machines in line. You would get alignment accuracies whatsoever, but it's all captured within this one, we think, powerful stamping method. So here are a couple of examples of what we have actually fabricated with this MPD technology. So it zoomed in on the feature which is located on the wafer. So on the left, we start basically with a coil. So again, what was the problem here is that they would have to integrate a coil, a copper coil, printed with copper ink, at a very small area. So there was not a lot of room to actually deposit it. However, basically for the project, we still wanted to have a lot of windings in that area to have a good transfer efficiency. The other thing, as we were miniaturizing the device, you basically shrink the contact, so typically you would have like less good conductivity. But with the MPD technology, as we were able to increase the aspect ratio, we were able to control and make sure that we still get to good conductivities, even if we were miniaturizing the device. Up next is a picture of a triangular shaped contact. So you can see it here in the top right corner better. So it's a very steep triangle, which has about 5 microns in width and 15 microns in height. We were using or printing these kind of triangles initially at Caltech for solar applications. So the idea was that typically at a solar cell one would have a flat contact and light would be reflecting off. So the challenge was, how do we make very steep, well-controlled triangular shaped contacts that, like a Toblerone chocolate bar, redirect the light to the active area of the solar cell. So that was a different project we were working on. And all the way to the right is basically the latest project or the latest application we're working on is the MEMS-based metal oxide gas sensor. And we have used the MPD technology to fabricate very precise and bread-like sensing elements on top of the microheaters, which I can tell a bit more later about. So the detailed process flow of how the MPD process works and what we're doing at Mesoline is basically we have 3 ingredients. So the first thing is we have the wafer coming in, which can be a MEMS wafer. The second thing is the mold, which we fabricate in-house, that I was showing you earlier, this polymeric material that we bring into contact with the wafer. And then the last thing is we also need the nano ink. Afterwards, the wafer, the mold, and the nano ink are all 3 put into our own machines in our fabrication facilities. And basically, we load the cassettes with wafers, we load the cassettes with the stamps. We put the nano inks in, which can be multiple inks if you want to print multiple different materials. Afterwards, the MPD machine will go through the process of bringing in the stamp, bringing in the wafer, putting them into contact, injecting the ink, curing, and gently peeling off the stamp again. Afterwards, you take the wafer out of the machine and go through a sintering step, and you basically get to the product that's shipped back to the customer. So at this point, as you can see on the top right corner, we've put quite a lot of effort into scaling up. And this is our new production site that we recently opened in the Netherlands. It's about 1,500 square foot, where we have state-of-the-art cleanroom facilities and laboratories where we can actually implement and perform this MPD process for customers and semiconductor companies. As I was mentioning earlier, we're really not an application company or a product company, so we're really focused on this MPD process. So what we do is we team up and planning to continue to team up with semiconductor companies to enable them to make next generation semiconductor devices by using our MPD technology to very accurately deposit nanoparticles. So we typically process wafers from a 4 up to 8 inch. The technology gets really powerful, as I was saying, not only if you do stamping, but as you can also fit a lot of devices on a single wafer. So that's why we're always looking at miniaturized products. Currently, our production capacity is we can process about 20,000 wafers a year, which if you say we put 10,000 devices on a wafer, we can do approximately 200 million of these devices, which would become much more challenging if you would be using inkjetting, for example. A little bit about the value chain and how we would work or how we would fit in the value chain. So basically, if we start all the way on the left with the device design, typically it's the design of the customer. However, we are involved at that part in order to be able to tell what is compatible and what is not compatible with our process. Up next, basically the MEMS wafer is fabricated. We're typically not involved in that process. Another thing is the nano ink, which is another important part of this process, which can either be outsourced from a third party or we can typically just redisperse in a solvent if the powders are provided to us. Yeah, then again, the wafer and the ink with our own molds are loaded into our machines going through a factory, and then the wafers are done and shipped and going on for dicing, packaging, sales distribution, whatever. So we're really focused at the MPD and basically providing this as a service to the community. As a next thing, I've talked, of course, a lot about this MPD and this new technology using this stem to deposit nanomaterials. I today also wanted to give you an overview and insight into one of the applications that we've been working on, which is a MEMS-based metal oxide gas sensor. So the MEMS-based metal oxide gas sensor is used in various industries. It can be from food packaging, which is an upcoming industry, which can be from medical, all the way from smart homes to transportation, and hopefully one day also in your smartwatch or in your mobile phone to really unlock those mass markets. The key requirements for such a metal oxide gas sensor is basically sensitivity, selectivity, power consumption, but also cost and manufacturability that we can actually scale and get into those mass markets. So if we look at how a typical metal oxide gas sensor, commercial one, is fabricated today, is one has the MEMS wafer, which contains the microheater, and on top of the microheater there's basically a blob or a drop via inkjetting or drop casting of a nanoparticle ink, of a metal oxide ink. This ink typically interacts with the target gas and changes its resistance, and that's what you're reading out, and that's how the device is working. So one of the key components of the device is basically the drop of ink, how you deposit the ink onto the microheater. And as you can see here on the right side, basically taken from a commercial gas sensor, it's very hard to control the drop of the ink coming out of the nozzle because it depends on the wettability of the surface. It's very hard to control the printed structure, the deposited structure, and it's a very slow process because you have to go every time with your nozzle to a certain location. You get a lot of device-to-device variation. So it is a way to manufacture gas sensors. But you can see in the top right corner, we've printed on top over the microheater, we've printed the 4 vertical black lines, which are our sensing elements, which were integrated using the MPD process. Another thing that's good about the MPD process is that we're printing, of course, with the nanoparticle ink, you get a very porous structure, which is good for gas sensing properties. So by using this MPD process, we were able to print very fine sensing elements. So the sensing elements shown here are about 10 microns in width with 3 microns in height. But if you would come to us, we need lines that are 5 by 15. We can basically change our stamp and thereby control. We can also change the aspect ratios or the width or the dimensions of the lines next to each other. So we have full control over the features that are being printed. Or we can say we print with different metal oxide inks that are targeted towards a different target gas. So you can make basically fuse sensing of multiple gases and get to better selectivity. So not only have we fabricated the device, we've also measured the device and done that in comparison with the state-of-the-art gas sensor that we bought just from Digi. So in the left, you can see sensor 1, sensor 2, sensor 3 is 3 times our MPD fabricated MOX sensor compared to a MOX sensor, which is the top line, basically, the dots. And as we can see from the data that we get to very high sensitivity and a reliable sensitivity was measured against ethanol. And what we can also see is that there's very little sensor-to-sensor variation. And this is all due to the fact that the mold very well controls where the nanomaterial ends up and where it shouldn't end up. On the right side, we can see that the sensitivity is surpassing the state-of-the-art sensor, because as we're miniaturizing, you would typically have less material. But as we can build up structures with higher aspect ratio, we still get a lot of material to do the actual, perform the gas sensing. Another thing, again, is that we see very low sensor to sensor variation, which requires hopefully less calibration in the future, which saves costs for the end user. So this is basically one of the examples of what we think MPD can enable, not only to the MEMS community, but to the semiconductor community. In conclusion, Mesoline is bringing to market a new type of microfabrication technology, MPD, which allows you in a very scalable and precise way deposit nanoparticles. So if any of you have trouble getting your nanoparticles and getting skilled devices on the market, please come talk to me later, or to my colleagues. Marnix, our CTO, is with me, and Mark Wilner as well. Two gentlemen over there. I would happy to talk and discuss and see if there's any need, how we can help you get some cool devices to market. Thanks a lot.
Here it is. I'm glad you didn't text my wife or anything. Time for a couple questions. In the back.
Hi. What gases can you sense, and when are these available?
So basically, we're not the gas sensor manufacturer, but it's a VOC sensor, so it's similar to what kind of gas? It's mostly VOCs we can detect. Volatile organic compound. Volatile organic compounds and.
Hey, what do you think? I'm just here for the good looks, or what?
No, and ethanol we can detect. So there's many different gases we can detect, but it's a standard metal oxide gas sensor we've developed. So there's nothing different in terms of what we can detect that others not can detect. It's very much on the manufacturability and the fact that we can shrink the device, but and you can do multi sensing with the one gas sensor.
Hi, Brett Goldsmith from Cardade. Maybe you mentioned it and I missed it. Can you use non-aqueous inks with solvent base?
So our inks, typically, so the powders are, the inks need to be formulated so they're compatible with our MPD process. So we do have certain requirements to the ink. So typically there can be a powder provided, like a nanopowder provided to us, and we redisperse into a solvent that's basically compatible with our process. Like for specific questions on the ink, I would refer to for the technical.
Got it.
Okay.
Follow-on question about that. So
Yeah.
you described this as, how do you delineate between ink versus nanoparticles? So for example, salt-based inks, with maybe a similar formulation as you would get in a graphene solution. Do you have a differentiation on that?
We have certain requirements for the ink and for the particles. So the particles need to be small to go through the channels.
Okay.
But basically, as long as the powders are provided and we can disperse it into a solvent, into the vehicle to get it through our microfluidic channels, then we should be able to print it. So we have a pretty wide variety of materials we can print with. So if you have graphene flakes, you have carbon nanotubes, so you could put that into a solvent that's compatible with our process, you should be able to print with that.
Okay.
Hi, very nice.
Here.
Nice technology. I had a little question actually regarding, you mentioned that it's ready for high volume. You can do so many wafers. And I understand once the stamp is filled, you can quickly, that's a quick process, but I guess the bottleneck is filling that stamp, because if it's an inkjet printing and you mentioned that you can be like multiple different ones, so actually what's your bottleneck, and is it a problem to fill those stamps? Because I have a feeling that that's taking a long time, that part.
No, so that's not. So we've basically engineered the stem such that it's multi-layered. So there's basically a distribution layer within the stem. So many of the smaller channels of the features are connected into a manifold up there to basically put it to just 10 spots that we need to inject with the ink.
Okay, so you did microfluidics within that stamp.
Exactly, so it's
okay,
basically
to
microfluidic
distribute it.
device, the stamp itself.
Okay, okay,
Yeah.
interesting. Thanks.
How many times can you use this stamp?
One time. There are probably in the future, we will increase that, but at this point, it's one time.
Yes, in the back. Thank
Uh,
you. One second.
One question now. You did mention about the dimensions that you can achieve. You did say 15, but again, you said 5. So with your process, what's the CD and pitch that you can achieve? Like, what's the minimum dimensions that you can achieve with your process? And the second question to that, sorry. You had a sintering process, a temperature window of 300 to 500. Is that the 300 the minimum temperature that you need, or is there a window to go below that?
So the first question is basically, we can change the stamp, so we can print features. Minimum, what we have done so far is basically 2.5 microns by 7.5 microns. We've also printed features up from 30 microns to 50 microns. So those are a bit the dimensions where, or the range in which we're operating. The second question, the temperature, is just the range of the applications that we're currently working on. But this very much depends mostly on the ink and the application, what is the curing temperature that's required for the device that you're fabricating. But the sintering process is very similar to what you would need for inkjetting, because that's just,
I mean, is there a path to go below 2.5 microns?
There could be potentially, but if you go much, much smaller, you end up with clogging issues because the channel gets too narrow to get the ink through. So the sweet spot, what we have seen so far, is really at the 2 to 30 microns in width, and then the height, the aspect ratio can be 5 to 60 microns. So very large features is difficult, and going below a micron is not where the technology is suited for. It's really in that sweet spot of building with nanoparticles, microstructure.
Question here.
Thank you, Thomas. My question is more of a business logistics thing, really. Do you see the company as being a service provider, as in people will send their wafers from the MEMS fab to you, or are you going to sell your equipment to the MEMS fabs or into the supply chain somehow? How do you
No,
Yeah.
definitely not sell. So we want to keep this manufacturing process in-house. We do have some design services where we do device design that actually make the MEMS wafer, also do the deposition with MPD, and we sell the complete wafer. The other option is that the customer can provide its MEMS wafer, its ink, and we just perform MPD. So those are the ways how to interact, but we definitely won't sell the technology or the machines.
Just a,
One. Okay.
okay, just a quick question. Do you have to come in contact with the surface, or can you just do a micro inkjetting by coming close to it? And let's say if there is a reservoir that you need to fill, can you do that without contacting the structure itself, but getting pretty close to it?
You mean the stamp, you mean?
Yeah.
I mean, you do need to inject into the stamp, so there is a contact between the nozzle and the stamp. That's where basically you inject the ink into.
Yeah, but does the stamp have to contact the wafer?
Yeah, it's in contact, because otherwise the ink would flow everywhere. So the channel through which the ink flows is formed by, the volume is formed by the wafer, with on top, for example, the stamp. That's forming the hollow channel through which the ink flows.
So you cannot micro inkjet, onto a small feature without touching the device.
No, there is contact between this
Okay.
this thing I was showing, the stamp, and the wafer.
Okay.
There is contact there, but otherwise you would also never achieve the fact that you could build up a 3D controlled structure, because the ink would flow everywhere. If you look at screen printing, like, you take off the screen and that's when the ink starts, or the paste starts spreading. So the fact that the stamp is in contact with the wafer allows you to really build up
Yeah.
that structure.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like when you have a small reservoir, and so you have, walls that would limit the spread of the material. but the structure is so sensitive that you don't want to touch it. So you just go and fill up the reservoir.
Maybe I don't understand what you mean with that exactly.
Imagine you're filling a pool,
Mm-hmm.
and you just want it to go in that pool.
You don't want to fill the rest.
Yeah.
I mean, you can engineer the stem so that you get to certain locations on the wafer that you could fill just that area. That should probably be possible to get it there, but it's basically a microfluidics device, so you have to have then the stem sealing off outside of that area, and then the ink should only go there.
Okay. Yeah, something to try, I guess, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Very quickly, I'm not sure if this is a common problem with these types of materials, but are there adhesion issues that you see between the silicon and the nano inks after they're cured or sintered?
I mean, the adhesion of the ink is of course always a challenge, and it's important, but that's basically material optimization of the ink that has to be done, but that's not something that's extremely particular to our printing technology. It's more that the ink also has to be compatible with the stem, and that's why we help also to make sure that the ink is compatible with MPD.
Okay, I'm going to call last question over here. I have 6 more myself, but I'm going to seek Thomas out at the upcoming reception.
How thick is that, or how long does it take you to make your stamp? Since some of them seem kind of complex. What's the time frame?
It is kind of complex. So our machine can print about 8 wafers an hour. So our volume machines can print about 8 wafers an hour. The stamp, we're working towards getting the stamps also to the same throughput, basically building up a production line for the stamps. So there are basically 6 or 7 steps our machines develop in order to make the stamp. So that is complex. But we will get to about 8 wafers an hour, which would get you to the 20,000 wafers a year.
Okay.
Cool.
One more round of applause here.